From a competitive gymnast to corporate executive, and then author of Lead Like a Girl, Dalia Feldheim has faced workplace adversity to realize her potential. Please welcome Dalia.
Welcome to Self-Leadership to Potential-ize with Andrew Bryant. We'll explore the power of potential and the promise of self-leadership. Join Andrew, a global leadership expert and author, as he shares insights, strategies, and stories spanning 25 years and 40 countries. Together, we'll unlock what makes us human, harness technology wisely, and step boldly into the future of leadership.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, thank you. What's been your journey in terms of living your potential?
Wow, it's a great question. I think I started as a competitive gymnast, and as a competitive gymnast, I think my biggest lesson was competing against myself. So it's always about being the best that you can be, improving every day, and that has been kind of my DNA. So I think that shaped me in many, many ways. I studied psychology and business, and I started with Procter & Gamble back in 98. And I was very lucky in that sense because P&G is a company that really puts the money where the mouth is on, maximizing human potential. I especially had bosses, sometimes that believed in me more than I believed in myself. So it was always about, what's the next great idea? You're in the driver's seat of your career. So I was very, and there was full flexibility to build your own potential and others' potential. So I very early on knew that I'm all about people empowerment, so both as a very young manager, team leader. I spent 50% of my time on coaching and training. Then as I grew, I became a training junkie, I joke and say, because P&G is a promote from within. So we do all our training in-house. So I actually was lucky, I trained everything from memo writing to presentation skills. But later on, I actually created 2 courses that influence what I do today. One was Women Supporting Women. That was so impactful. And it was all about, it was very early on, it was 99, and we were talking about belonging in the workplace and, connecting to your own personal values. It was a very deep psychological course in a corporate environment. And I was one of the first, staff members. And it was so successful that, one of our presidents decided to make it into a co-ed program of people supporting people, which had its magic as well. And then later on, I evolved it. And together with my boss, we created a course called From Manager to Leader. And, very quickly, we realized that it's a totally different skill set. So I would say my first 17 years of my career, and that's why I call my company Flow Leadership, because I was in a state of flow. I didn't know the term at the time, but I knew, people believed in me, gave me a lot of autonomy. And I was constantly learning and growing. So, those 17 years, we did these campaigns like Always Run Like a Girl. And also so both as a team leader, but also in my role as a marketing director, I was all about human potential. And, I was marketing director for Femke, okay, pads, tampons. And I worked in developing markets. And I saw how, I remember the story of, when I landed in India, I'll just tell you that one, for the very first time. And I saw this very young girl in the outskirts of Mumbai, and she was reading a book, but she didn't have any electricity. So she was literally reading to the light of passing cars. And that kind of stuck in my mind on, human potential, how when we're internally driven, right, how magical. And I saw so many women in India that impressed me so much. And then we did this campaign of Touch the Pickle on women empowerment, etc., way before Me Too. So the interesting thing in my story is that I saw what good looks like. I saw what happens when leaders believe in your potential, and we can talk a little bit more, trying to boil down what exactly that means. However, my story gets interesting because I saw exactly the opposite. So after 17 years in P&G, and I was in Geneva, Moscow, and Singapore, I moved to another company as CMO Asia. Great company, everything seemed perfect, dream role, loved the CEO, CMO. I literally thought I landed my dream role. 1 month into the role, I got a new boss, and he was a bully. Okay, I can't put it in any nicer terms. But he had a lot of issues himself, but he very strongly believed that the only way to succeed is by bringing other people down. He told me, right, very openly, in many different ways. And I found it, so I was a coach at the time, okay? I did my ICF. I was also a yoga teacher. So I said, okay, the universe sent me a challenge, okay? Let's see, let's apply all my learning. And I'll tell you also a secret that I don't tell many people, but the headhunter that placed me in the role took me for coffee maybe 3 months. And she was asking me how it's going. And I was very loyal. And I was telling her, this is working, this isn't, and then she stopped me in my words and she said, Dalia, your boss is an asshole. I know, I placed him there. You're the only one who can change him. And I thought to myself, whoa, okay. So suddenly I had this cape of, I am going to change him. And I'll tell you, Andrew, I really tried everything in my toolkit. Okay, I get emotional just thinking about it because it was a really challenging time. I had a very strong core. I knew what I was about. I knew my values. I knew I had potential. And he was determined, and that was an interesting, to create imposter syndrome with me. I didn't have imposter syndrome beforehand. Okay. I don't think I had, in the sense I had a low level, but he would tell me very honestly, I think people told you you're too great. This is, he really focused. My strengths were not important. Okay. So I was too good with my people. I was too creative, not process driven enough. And I was even too positive. In one meeting, he kind of called me Miss Kumbaya, and that became my nickname. Okay. So I'm just kind of giving you the opposite. Okay. He would laugh at, everything I was good at was, mockery for him. And the interesting thing, Andrew, is that slowly it got to me. Okay. And, I started to think.
Would you call this, was he gaslighting you?
He was, all over. This is also a term that I'm recently understanding, but he would, the one famous story that I also talked about in the TED, one story that I also spoke about in the TED, he brought me into his room and he gave me feedback. And I love feedback. I was always educated on tough love. I love feedback. Feedback should, when you talk about potential, I am a believer that a leader shouldn't sugarcoat anything, right? You need to be honest. But my leaders always came from a very strong sense of love. I'm with you. Let's figure out, these behaviors, why they come. An opportunity is usually an overuse of a strength, right? So let's kind of tame that. But there was no love that day. It was just really denigrating, humiliating. It's almost like he was kind of on a task. And then later on, I understood the task. And he started kind of insulted my team. And that's, when I became a lioness, because team building, the team was really important for me. I knew how hard they worked. And I was getting so angry and so frustrated that a tear appeared in my eye. And he smiled and he gave me a box of tissues. And I didn't share that earlier, but one of my first bosses kind of always used to tell me, never apologize for crying in the office. It's a sign of passion and not a weakness, right? So that was my growing up, if you like. But in this case, I noticed something weird in his smile, and he turned around the tissue box he gave me, and on the other side was a sticker that said Dalia's tissue box. So not only was he gaslighting, he was deliberately, he brought me in and he was deliberate about making me cry, breaking me down. He told me, I think you're too confident and my role is to break you down. Very honestly. So that was my experience, and I won't go too much into detail because it's not about him, but what's interesting about this story is what it did to me. Okay, because suddenly, despite all the 17 years success in P&G, I started to develop an imposter syndrome. Maybe I was lucky. Maybe I had a great team, right? And it started getting to me. And I thought to myself, when you think about potential, if I had that boss in my first 5 years, I would have never known what I'm capable of, right? And despite having that 17 years of success and being a very seasoned marketeer, and, I still got a lot of compliments from the global CMO and the global CEO. So I knew I knew what I was doing. I was professional, right? Yet still, he was able to bring me down, and it got to me. I stayed there 3 years. I tried everything in my toolkit, the fight, the flight, the freeze, fear of failure crept in like crazy, in the sense that you won't believe how much energy I spent on every email I sent because I knew he would mock it. He was literally looking, once I made a mistake with the exchange rates, okay? It was Swedish krona anyway, not a very common exchange rate. And he was like, oh, Dalia doesn't know his math. And I said, sorry, I'm summa cum laude in math. I was trying to he's like, oh, don't mess with Dalia. She's a rocket scientist. So it was kind of, every opportunity, the more resilient I became, the meaner he became. And it became what later I studied to be the dance of death, because all he wanted is my appreciation. And I became so dependent on external validation. So
you were moving towards Stockholm syndrome.
Very, very clearly, right? Very clearly. It's you talk about that. It's interesting because when first of all, I didn't realize while I was in it, the downward spiral. Okay. Mm-hmm. What saved me in a way, because I was becoming, I thought of myself as a resilient, feisty little one. I spoke back. I stood on my principle, but I tried, humor but I never really did one thing, and that was zero tolerance. I never said sorry, No, I never put up my boundaries in a clear enough way. And I think what saved me in a way is the beginning of year 3, I actually attended a P&G alumni event, so my previous company. Mm-hmm. And I walked in, and Andrew, everyone was talking about servant leadership and take care of your people, and the business takes care of itself, and human potential. And as a leader, your role is to maximize human potential and understand. And I literally sat down in my chair and I was like, oh my God, I'm a frog in boiling water. Mm-hmm. So, it was literally a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And only when I left, that gave me perspective that, whoa, I need to leave. And there and then I made the decision I'm going to leave at the end of the year, but not before I come back to my strengths. It's not before I bring my strengths into the workplace, because that's the essence of human potential, is knowing what your strengths are and bringing them to work every day. If you're not able to do that and realize that every person has different set of gifts, right? Mm. My set of gifts are not the same as my boss. It's great that you're a Six Sigma, process driven. I'm wired differently, utilize it. Now, the interesting thing is that in the beginning of year 3, I actually hired a lady to work for me that was very similar to him. And that was a great learning experience, because she and I were complete opposites, but there was so much mutual respect that, we learned from each other a ton. She literally would come into my creative meetings and literally tell me, I decoded your process. Okay. I told her, can you share with me the code so I know what but it was really fascinating to see that, working with people that are very different from you is super powerful when there's, mutual respect. So long story short, and I'll just you asked me the journey. I left after 3 years. When I left, I had an exit interview. He was asked to leave, but I was fascinated with this topic of human potential. I said to myself, how come same person in P&G, really, I was top rated every single year. Same person in another environment, I shriveled, right? I was frustrated with myself because I wasn't able, only in the 3rd year when I decided to drop that fear, was I able to come back to myself and deliver. And, so that's my journey. And then, I decided to go study it. I did my master's in organizational psychology and positive psychology. And today I work with companies on maximizing human potential in the work.
Fabulous.
So that's my journey. That's my why.
So no, thank you for sharing the journey. I asked the question and you answered it. There's lots to unpack there. And let's do it. Let's do it chronologically. You talked about your early time as a gymnast, right? And gymnastics is one of those sports that's actually quite famous for having very tough coaches, right? In the US, they imported Romanian and ex-Russian coaches, and they could actually be a bit like your boss, your Six Sigma boss. And there are stories of gymnasts being absolutely destroyed. Yet you talked about finding yourself and your own passion as a gymnast. So what was your relationship with your early coaches then as a gymnast? Did you get that? Were you lucky in getting somebody that empowered you and gave you autonomy early on?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I never kind of thought about it in that way, but the answer is yes. I mean, my very first coach was like a big sister. Okay.
Right.
He was only 5 years older than I was, and I was the eldest in the group as well. And what was interesting there was we worked really hard. So I know that performance is core. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that performance requires hard work. I learned that very early. I learned the importance of discipline, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self-driven discipline, because I think I see it on my kids sometimes. Oh, I'm really kind of remembering. I see it on the kids. It doesn't work when it's externally driven, at least not with me. Okay. And she was always just like my good bosses in P&G, you can get there. I know you can. There was one failure experience, if you like, that I recall where I was supposed to be, national gymnast. Like I was targeted to be number one, in my age group. And I did a great competition, but in the very last apparatus, I got stuck in the rope and I lost half a point and I came in second. And I remember she came in kind of super frustrated, right? Screaming at me. How did you get stuck? You never get stuck. I mean, how did we lose this competition? But my mom was there and she kind of stood between us and she said, what are you talking about? It's her first competition and she's already number 2. We're going out to celebrate. And that reframing for me was really, really valuable. So, but I think also another thing, so I never got to number 1 again. Okay. I was number 2 and then number 3. But then another thing kicked in, which was coaching others.
Yeah.
And because I was the eldest, I was kind of a little mother to them as well. And they became my protege. And when they overtook me to, place 3, 2, and 1, I knew, I wanted to shift now. So when I was no longer on the podium, I said, okay, this work it doesn't justify the cost. And I don't need to be number 1 because I want to enjoy the ride. And that was a very, very strong lesson for me. So it was always about working hard and being the best that I can be. Doesn't matter if I'm number 1 or not. So I think, at a very, very, I was maybe 10, 12, very young age. It was about, working hard, but also enjoying the ride. And so when I was 13 and I realized, I'm off the podium and these girls that were my protege, I was so proud of them. I actually decided to shift and become a coach. So I was one of the youngest national coaches at 14, I think. And I was already bringing my girls to competitions. So I think that's also an interesting element that I learned 2 things. I learned the importance of hard work. I learned the internal motivation, the importance of intrinsic motivation. Okay. No. Because I never worked for my coaches. I worked always for being the best that I can personally be. I don't know how and where I learned it, if it was from my mom or my coach, but that kind of sank in. And I learned the value of giving back as I became a coach myself.
Well, you were very fortunate. I've actually interviewed a number of athletes from different sports and also Paralympians. And a lot of them talk about having to realize who you are separate from the medal, right? So you talk about self-motivation, but what I'm hearing from this is at a very early age, you actually discovered a self-identity.
Yeah. This coach, I literally can close my eyes and imagine ourselves taking the taxi. It was a 2 hours ride to the gym center. And I was literally their coach. I was checking that they did their homework. I was plaiting their hair, right? I was kind of with the coach, helping them prepare for competitions. And that became my identity in a way.
Which you carried into PNG and beyond.
I guess so. It was kind of being the importance of being a role model. I didn't realize that. So the first years in PNG, I'll tell you that, it was very hard work. Okay. I loved it. We thrived. I can still remember, my boss is also a legendary people development. Okay. Jim Lafferty. I talk about him in the TED. And he did so many things right. Okay. We worked hard, but at 1 a.m. when we were doing business reviews, he would come with pizza and we would kind of sit and kind of celebrate. And every Friday we would go rollerblading in winter or water skiing. There was a lot of belonging, a lot of team building, but he was also very demanding, very demanding. I would come with an idea and he's like, that's amazing, Dalia. Why didn't you think about it a year ago? Let's execute, I always felt like the bar was very, very high, but he would, every time, I reached a summit, he was like, amazing, great work, celebrate. Now what's the next summit? And I'm here to hold you throughout. So it was a really interesting kind of role modeling of what leadership is all about. It doesn't mean lowering the standard. It doesn't mean sugarcoating, right? Very high standard, very demanding, but also giving you, enabling you, pinpointing exactly what you need to learn, but what are you good at and how can you maximize it? And he taught me strengths-based leadership. Okay. He was the one that, this is your gift, go full Monty with this gift. Find the ways to complement, right? And it's not that you're void of opportunities, but, find a way, recruit people, but you have this amazing gift, run with it.
Sorry, I interrupted there. So you're very much a beneficiary of the Pygmalion or the Rosenthal effect, that you've had other people believe in you. Before you go, if you can hold that third point, I just want to throw in and ask your opinion as a gymnast. Clearly, the most famous gymnast in the world right now is Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And, she famously took autonomy and said, I need to take a break for my own psychological safety. And, it's interesting. You talked about your coach. When your coach got frustrated, it was our gold medal or our first position. She had vicariously, put that on. And it would have been the same for Simone Biles. Do you have a comment on, clearly you still follow, I checked your Facebook, clearly you still follow the sport. So do you have a comment? Do you have a comment on what
my book came out already. It was ready to go to press. And then, the story with Simone came out and I literally told them, and I put a whole element about, in the chapter on managing our own mental health. And I was so proud of her. I think what she did was incredible because she did it for herself. She did it for her teammates, right? She didn't want to kind of bring them down. And then she came back. And I think we, if I could teach my kids one thing, it would be this: internally motivated, high standards, work hard, but enjoy the ride. And if you're feeling like you're not, if you're feeling that the hard work comes at the expense of being healthy, mentally, emotionally, then something is wrong. And I remember my bully boss actually once told me, you're the only one that don't get excited by my deadline, okay? That don't get stressed. Like I would come back and say, sorry, it's not realistic. This is the process that I'm going to follow at some stage when I was able to kind of hold myself. This is what I'm going to focus. I can deliver this by the date you asked me, but I want to do more. And if you give me an extra half a day, this is what I'm going to deliver. And he was like, and I think there was something there, and Simone was just so incredible in the sense that she was in tune with herself. She was in tune with her body, her mental health. To say, I need a break. And as leaders, that is a very brave thing to do.
Yeah.
And as leaders, that is a very important. Managing energy is more important than managing time. Managing energy of our teammates, of our team, is more important than helping them with skills, right? And I think go back to my first boss, Jim, and how he helped us manage our energy, right? Rollerblading, skiing, work hard, play hard. The key for creation is recreation, right? You can't be creative and you can't do your work when and I felt it. I felt it personally in those last 3 years. I stopped performing because I was like in a panic attack for the first 2.5 years. And I think this is the biggest gift we can give the leaders of the future. We're all on the verge of burnout. So now I do a lot also on well-being, and I'm also a yoga teacher and a meditation practitioner. I can't say that I'm perfect because I'm a hyperactive. So I myself am constantly, right, finding the right balance. But I think I learned early on the importance of constantly climbing. We never stop climbing. I will never stop climbing. So it's constantly self-improving and growing. But that is my motto. Have an idea of where you're heading, meaning set goals, see where you're going, right? Write the next book, okay? Have an idea of where you're heading, but don't forget to enjoy the view on the way. And that's a very important part. If you don't stop, assess yourself. Where am I? Do I need a rest? What am I doing? Enjoy the view, smell the roses, and then continue climbing. So yes, she's a legend.
Very good. You did have another point. Do you still remember it? Or I've got my next question ready.
No, go with the next one.
Okay. So, it's great to hear your positive experience with P&G. I actually did a TEDx for P&G in 2016. But unfortunately, were you there?
There wasn't. No, but I remember Avi telling me about it.
So I did that for them. But here's the interesting thing, as you said, that we talked about the Rosenthal or the Pygmalion effect, when somebody believes in you, that raises your performance. And you've had, a gymnastic experience of that. Then you had that to build yourself and to accelerate yourself. So you experienced that environment that allowed you to have autonomy, set your own goals, deliver your own identity. And so that built a level of resilience within you. The point that you made is that had you done it the other way around and had the bully of a boss, you might never have reached your potential. It might have been crushed really, really early. So then you said that, okay, you move jobs and the universe is like, I've got this boss. Now I've got to learn how to handle him, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about trying everything, but it not working. I'm wondering now, with retrospect, having discovered, having studied positive psychology and organizational psychology, if you were to go back into that position, you said one thing I didn't do was establish my boundaries. And, as somebody who talks about self-leadership, boundaries is a big deal. I'm wondering whether you could see yourself going to him, what's wrong with you? As opposed to making it about you, and that gaslighting put the focus on where you were wrong. But in fact, as we're listening to this story, we both know that there was something deeply troubling about somebody that needed to make you small to make himself feel big, right? With 2020 hindsight, could you have called him on his own pathology?
So it's very interesting. First of all, I really believe people will rise to your highest expectation or sink to your lowest. Okay. And that's really important as a leader, because he was kind of expecting me to fail. And when you're looking for it, you will find it. Okay. So even myself, I was like, I thrive on expectations, right? But when I'm supported to get there, I think, the whole reflection on what the hell happened there for the last 3 years, that's why my book, I always joke and say it wrote itself. It was 4 months. It was a lot of storytelling, the science, all my insights and learning. So I, of course, spent a lot of time reflecting that. I think one of the biggest, I tried empathy kind of approach, not in the sense of everything okay, but in the sense of using humor, once I kind of said, why do you need to stab and turn? Isn't stabbing enough? Something like that. And he's like, yeah, because you're not falling down. I try and you keep coming up. And I said, well, is that a game for you? And he said, yeah, I'm enjoying it. Aren't you? So there was kind of, on the one hand, a really like weird open, or I would say something. And I said, I would kind of cough up my courage to come and say, when you said that, this is how it made me feel. And he would go, on a one-on-one, he would go, I said that? I'm such an asshole. Next time I say that, please, in a meeting, give me a red ticket, okay? And then comes the meeting, and I give him a red ticket, and he kind of gets, and brings me down even further. So there was a very different, it was almost schizophrenic. There was a very different personality on one-on-one and in group environment. And he told me, stories about how he was bullied as a child and how he learned that he needs to bring other people down to feel important. And so there were moments of kind of coaching or caring, but then he would say, you think I don't care? For me, Dalia, care is one thing, giving you the maximum bonus every year. I'm all about performance. I don't care about the human aspect at all. It's all transactional. You deliver your numbers and that's it.
Okay.
And yeah.
So, there's two questions that come out of that for me. One is, did you perform under that pressure?
No.
No.
Nope.
Okay. So you
not to my own liking. Okay.
Because
they assess. Yeah.
Yeah, because the interesting thing is, right, you felt that you performed under the P&G supportive environment, right? So there is a self-fulfilling prophecy for managers like this, that fear-driven leadership does actually, in the short term, deliver results and therefore becomes a self-reinforcing behavior, as you understand, right? So I'm curious, did you deliver results? I think you probably met the targets, didn't you?
I did. Okay. I even over-delivered in some aspects from a company perspective. But I knew I gave them 10% of my ability. And that was his point. And that was also the CEO's point. He is delivering. And later on, I read that research in Harvard Business Review on different styles of leadership. And a fear-based leadership does deliver short-term. Okay. Because fear puts you into, it's also a type of motivation. However, in the long term, and many companies don't even assess the cost. Half of our team left or were fired. So the cost of turnover, okay? Phantom bullying, that's a really interesting phenomenon. Even when he left, his impact on the culture was felt, and there's assessment of about 3 to 5 years, okay, of it being so toxic. And I stayed in touch. I actually did my thesis, and I went and interviewed all my peers. And you could see how the toxins are still in there, right? So there's something called phantom, that costs the company money. And then on the long term, that's the research that love-based leadership delivers higher results and longer term. So I think that's a really interesting, because too many companies are blind to it. They saw, that's the other thing, and I don't want to go too deep because I don't want to get them in trouble. But, when the first assessment came out, I was sure, okay, HR will now understand what's going on, because, I will give honest feedback and my peers will give honest feedback and it's anonymous. And we did. However, the jump versus last year was the highest in the region. So he ended up actually getting an award. Okay. And I was holding my head and saying to myself, how can a company get it so wrong? Read between the lines. And there's also a fear. Honestly, I was shocked with the amount of fear, because at some stage when one person was fired, he did an interview. And so the global HR came to interview everyone, and people didn't talk. People didn't share. I think I was the only one that kind of, and when I spoke with my colleagues, there was like, they can read it. They can read between the lines. They need to understand what's going on here. So there's also, it's a very interesting dynamic from an HR perspective, because fear delivers results, and we need to remember that. So someone may be performing, but if they're not performing on the human aspect, over time, they are killing their teams and they won't deliver the results. So,
yep. Well, I absolutely agree with you. There's no doubt, and this is, this is a powerful story. So, as a coach now working with organizations, I asked you the question, what would you say differently if you had to advise somebody in that position? I mean, your end result was to leave, right?
yeah.
You tried everything. You said it didn't work. He was eventually let go. So what was the tipping point, right? Because I've been in this position coaching a woman who is being manipulated, and I know what the discussions I had. I wonder what with 2020 hindsight would you, if you were coaching that Dalia now with what you now know, what would be the advice you would give?
So leaving is not always easy or possible. In my case, I was a main breadwinner. My husband was opening a startup. We needed the family stability. The house was on me, the kids' schooling, you know how it is in Singapore. And plus, I brought a lot of P&G employees to work for me. I loved what I was doing and I loved my team. So, and I was a competitive gymnast. We don't quit, right? So I tried, to hang on there. I wanted to stay. I wanted to make an impact. I learned, in hindsight, I would say, and I think if I would have left immediately, so some of my HR colleagues were, I'm never going to work with a person like that, and I left. I think if I would have left immediately, I would have felt like I didn't try. So I always say, stay 6 months. Try and see if you can bring your strengths to the workplace, then you can work. Because it's also, in today's day and age, the younger generation sometimes think there's no hardship. You will always have hardship. This boss was extreme, right? But I believe in staying through hardship because we grow from hardship. Okay. So I don't believe in kind of, leaving immediately. I would say stay 6 months. Try and see if you can find a win-win. So, if you can meet the other's need, even though they're very different than how your beliefs, but without sacrificing yourself. In my case, I wasn't able to, right? I wasn't able to meet the needs without sacrificing myself because I was all about creativity and teamwork. And if that wasn't appreciated in that environment and I couldn't bring it to life, then it wasn't the right environment for me. So, as my first boss said, leave, they don't deserve you. It's almost like it was a bungee jump. It was really scary, right? Financially, etc. But I think, don't underestimate. So that's why I say, stay 6 months, try your best. Okay. Try to meet others' needs without sacrificing yourself. And that's where boundaries come in. Okay. No one should own your happiness but you. And when you feel like you're letting someone take control of your happiness and you're not able to regain, control of it, it's not the right environment, and you can't change someone that doesn't want to change. That's another really important lesson. You can't change yourself until you lose yourself. So I think this is kind of, and then after 6 months, walk away. They don't deserve you. Believe there's a better opportunity out there, okay, for you. So I think that's all. It's not easy. And, I coach a person to leave and then they struggle because COVID came in and they struggle to find. It's also a huge responsibility, right? However, don't underestimate the psychological impact. I was sick, okay, in burnout, in post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Despite being a strong, capable person, I underestimated how much toxins this develops in your body. So I wouldn't have stayed 3 years. That would be my advice to my younger self.
Well done you for doing that. So I know that you have to rush off and we've got a hard stop. You've been interviewed a bunch of times before, as have I. We've had a good conversation. But my final question is, what is the question that somebody should have asked you, but they've never asked you? So what's the question that I should have asked you and I haven't yet?
I think it's really interesting for every person to figure out what are they afraid of. and why.
Yeah.
When I work as a coach, I really am fascinated that our behaviors are driven, by, past trauma, or sometimes we don't think we have past traumas, but it's interesting. I recently thought about what am I afraid of, right? And it's linked to our topic. And when you said it in the first sentence, I was like, whoa. And that is feeling wasted.
Yep.
Right? When you're not meeting your full potential. And I guess it's linked to that gymnast story or whatever. But I think also facing your fears is really important, in the sense of, that's courage. Courage is not hiding away from your fear. It's facing your fears, understanding where they come from, understanding your superpowers, and then going ahead anyway. So I think that's also, for me, a driver, because I'm afraid of being wasted, that I'm afraid of my kids. I want to help them be happy. It's a very fine line. Meeting the potential, right? Maximizing your own potential, but in a way that you're not, driving yourself to mental illness. So I think this balance is,
Yeah. So that first question that I'm answering in the book is, am I reaching my potential, and overcoming that as a fear? So you have done a number of things, significant things, lived in different countries. Are you living up to your potential now?
It's a super interesting point, because other people would say, whoa, your TED is $250,000 and your book, blah, blah, blah. And for other people, it seems like, and I constantly ask myself, would I have a bigger impact if I was a chief happiness officer of Meta, for example, or doing things within company, right? For me, it's about touching lives. I have a kind of mission to touch 1 million hearts. I'm not there yet. So yeah. And I think but I take it in a very different perspective now. I'm not stressed about it. It's a beautiful summit that I'm climbing towards. So no, I'm not, but in a good way. I'm not yet at my full potential, and I'm excited about it because it gives me the motivation every morning.
Very good. Thank you so much for your time, Dalia.
Thank you for joining us on Self-Leadership to Potential-ize with Andrew Bryant. If you're ready to be the driver of your life and not the passenger, keep exploring with us. Get your copy of Potential-ize wherever good books are sold. For more resources or to book Andrew for coaching and speaking engagements, visit selfleadership.com. Until next time, think smart, lead better, and always potentialize your future.